taking the time with us today. We're going to have a focused session today around some of the best practices, tips and tricks that we've learned around integrating your ERP data into your Salesforce instance. A couple of things that we're going to learn today and go over. One, best practices. Two, how to take some of that data and with the Salesforce automation and or features, deliver clear and actionable data to drive sales and marketing growth. And then finally, we'll round out with a handful of top reports and outputs that take that data and turn it into something useful for quick, effective decision making. So our first objective, those best practices for ERP and Salesforce integration. The first and foremost thing that we can say is focus on what you need. That's comprised of three primary facets. First, the data that you need to drive sales. Too often we see customers that cast their net too wide when it comes to integrating data from various systems, whether it's ERP or financial systems. And you end up introducing noise into the system. The goal is to keep it focused on what your objectives are, whether it's sales and marketing, service, or otherwise, but don't introduce information that is not useful or has minimal usefulness driving towards those objectives. You want to drive both sales behaviors that are positive, but also actionable information as you move forward so that they're not sifting through things that are false positives, if you will. The nice to haves. These invariably will come up. Salesforce is a platform of nearly infinite expandability. So great ideas come up, but a lot of those can be classified as a nice to have. So if you have a requirement for something where someone spends 5 minutes once a month, or maybe it's once a quarter, I would challenge that and say, is that worth putting something additional into an integration layer to support that if it's one person? If it's 30 people doing it, 5 minutes a month, then maybe you could make that justification. But those nice to have, so things like serial number data. Not a whole lot of general sales value or marketing value in serial number level data. So in our manufacturing customers, having that incorporated in the Salesforce, while we have seen a few unique use cases where that is useful, it generally is not. So you want to challenge that and make sure you're focusing on the things that are truly actionable and aren't just the nice to haves. And finally, the frequency of real-time data. Every time that we get into a scenario with this and our customer comes and says, I need real-time data. And we ask, what does that mean? Because in a technical sense, real-time data is sub-second or near-second transactional type integration. And those types of integrations tend to be more complex and drive up the cost of both implementation and then ongoing maintenance. So we recommend you ask the question, what are you going to do with that data in the next 30 seconds? If the answer is, well, my sales team isn't really going to act on it, maybe within 15 minutes, maybe it's an hour, maybe it's half a day. They just hope that the guidance is they need to act on it within 24 hours. Well, then a near real-time scenario, something that maybe only had 5 minutes of latency, would result in maybe a simpler integration topology and something's easier to maintain. It might be more in the skill sets of your existing IT organization versus something that's more complex and more of a message-based transactional integration. So that near real-time, it's still within 5 minutes per se. Sometimes it's maybe even 1 minute, but still results in something that is easier to maintain going forward, easier to find skill sets for. Additionally, now we do find real-time integration scenarios. So, for instance, if you are leveraging Salesforce's CPQ product to generate quotes, and you want to integrate that back in your ERP, and once you close that opportunity, you want to turn that into a sales order, you want that to go right into your ERP almost immediately. That is a transactional type integration scenario. There's a lot of value because you want to get that into your fulfillment cycle as soon as possible. So there are scenarios where that is true. Typically, we see them in two-way integrations. But for the majority of integration scenarios that we see where it's inbound in the Salesforce, this is getting information that can be acted on. A near real-time, what we'll call batch or scheduled integration that's a simpler overall design is generally the best practice. So before we get into some automation processes around that data, I want to show you some examples of that data. So I'm going to switch screens here real quick. So here's an example. This demo is built around a manufacturer that has two general types of customers. One of them is more of a distributor or large customer, and then direct customers, if you will, and sell to the end user. So in this case, I'm showing a couple things in Salesforce's Lightning experience that came straight from the ERP. What's their credit limit? What's their balance as opposed to that credit limit? Current year-to-date sales and prior year-to-date sales. I want to talk about that for a minute because this is one of the key things. Almost every scenario that we see in implementation, one of the primary sales goals is tied around growth, and it's year-to-date. I don't, yes, it's important to track where I am in February against the entire year, but specifically, how am I performing as opposed to the same point in time last year? Very common sales requirement. And a lot of your growth, as you can see here, current year-to-date growth is driven off of those type of calculations. So the data coming out of the ERP, fairly simple if you think about it, straightforward. There may be some complexity around how what numbers matter. Do you include freight in that, or do you not include freight? Those types of questions. But all of that can be driven from the integration and still keep a simple integration topology that's effective, and you're driving things that you can act on. And I'll get to that in a minute. One other key thing here, and this is actually leveraging Salesforce on top of that data, gap to make goal. So if I'm a sales rep and I know that my account is underperforming, how much do I need to close that gap? I don't need to go in and look at every account and do the math and pull out a calculator and figure that out. It's fairly easy to tap that in if you have a predictable target. Now, one thing I do want to say around those targets, we understand and we see like strategic or large customer targets are generally percentage-based growth. I want 5% year over year. However, new business generally is a quota or a dollar amount growth, right? I need to see $2 million in new business this year versus a growth year over year in those scenarios. And both of those can be supported. So I want to move next into some scenarios where we can automate some, and leverage some of the features in Salesforce around this that will take some of this information and make it actionable. So here's one key feature. It just pops up at the top. We leveraged a free app off the Salesforce App Exchange to generate these warnings, these kind of pop-ups around that, and they disappear on their own. We can make them not disappear. But what are the things I need to pay attention to? I don't need to go in and look at it, scrutinize the number, it pops it up front and center. In that case, their credit limit, their credit balance is within 10% of their credit limit. And that the threshold doesn't matter here, but the point is from an account management standpoint, and we normally see the sales team as part of that account management, trying to be that single point of contact and drive that audience of one, a very personal type of relationship. If this customer routinely buys on their credit line, we don't want to interrupt that. Let's just say they have a monthly buying cycle or even a biweekly buying cycle, and if they're within 10% of their credit limit, they may not be able to make that purchase. So this allows you to become more proactive versus reactive around that. I know I can reach out to them and work on that. Maybe it's a missed payment, maybe whatever it might be. Additionally, other pieces around that, obviously credit status or aging periods. We have customers that say, I want to see the 30, 60, 90. Again, I want to tie that back to sales and account management goals. If your sales team is managing that and they're going to act on it, that makes sense. If they're not, you don't put that in there. We also had another alert there on the current year-to-date growth. You can see in this case, we're at just over 1% growth. Our target is 5%, so it gave me that alert. And I know right away my gap to make goal on that is approximately $8,200. So as a sales rep, I now know what the issues are with the account, what I need to do to take action on that. Additionally, leveraging both the integration and the automation, we can drive other features within Salesforce, assigning tasks. So I'll show an example of that real quick here. So this is the home page. Follow up, I've got a task down here in today's task on the right middle here. Follow up with Power Products distribution. They're in 10% of the credit limit. And this is not something that shows up every day. You can, with the automation coupled with the data coming out of the ERP, this may be a once a month type scenario. We would only put this in there. Don't want to create noise in the system. I don't want to create a bunch of false positives every day that they're in 10%. I get a new task. No, but to follow up on that. And so when your sales team members get in, they know exactly what they have to do. They don't have to go look through their 50 accounts, figure out which ones are within that threshold, which ones do I need to call on that. The system will tell them at that point, leveraging that data from the ERP, again, clear and actionable, but driving things that can be tracked and drive the positive behaviors that you're looking for. So beyond that, I'd like to get into a couple of outputs, if you will, that, reports and outputs, leveraging that data that we see, drive focus and then overall performance. So here on our homepage, a trend over time report, very, very common use case, but giving us on the data coming out of the ERP, giving us a clear insight on where we stand versus, let's say, last year. And sometimes it's weekly, sometimes it's monthly. This can be focused to just the sales reps data or across an entire team or across an entire organization, and driving that out of the ERP to give that sense of where we are at any point in time. Again, I will take this a step further. One of the common use cases is, unlike this report, is I want to see cumulative year to date. So I want to see January and February together. What's that compared to January and February together last year? So either one of those use cases, it just depends on what you're tracking towards, or do you have monthly targets and do they build upon each other, or is every month a new month to attain your goal? Another, what I would call low-hanging fruit based off of that data, but the leaderboard. Sometimes in traditional sales organizations, you see this based off of opportunity data, opportunity closes. However, in manufacturing distribution, often the opportunity is for a relative amount of business. However, what you're truly measuring is the sales that are coming in. So I may close for $100,000, but the customer may only buy $92,000 in that year, or they may buy $125,000. So you want to base that on actuals when you're talking actual sales goals. I can't go to the street with opportunity closes unless they tie it to things that are in my financial system. So leaderboard is very effective for a couple of reasons. Successful sales organizations are naturally competitive. The best sales members that I've worked with always want to be on the top of the list. It seems simple. It is maybe it's a little bit of simple psychology, but the goal is I know where I stand. So if I'm Jeff Makers here, I know I'm second, but I'm not at the top of the list. And when it comes down to draft day, do you want to be the top of the list or the bottom of the list? This also helps promote the behaviors that you're looking for in a successful sales team. Generally, with a few exceptions, your most successful sales team members are the ones that are following your strategy, whether it's activity management, driving the information out of the ERP and following up on those account management scenarios, following up on one of the things I'm going to get to in a minute around white space. What are my cross-sell, upsell opportunities? So all of those work together to drive that healthy competition. I do have customers like, no, I don't want my sales teams to see what each other's doing, but you can still constrain that through an integration scenario at a high level, so they can't get into the detail and see what accounts and whatnot they are, but still see where they stack up. Another common slant on this is, instead of making it a raw dollar amount or units based, because you have some segmentation within your account base. Sometimes you have a large or commercial customer base, and then you have new business or small small business customers that are managed by different reps. So if you wanted to see them all together, it may be a percentage of target type reporting in that leaderboard versus overall revenue, because we know those larger accounts will probably drive more revenue, but you don't want to discourage the positive behavior and leveraging that data coming out of your ERP for anyone in the system. Additionally, when you talk about those targets, and again, I'm focusing on one or two, generally we do recommend you keep it to 5 key objectives. You get more beyond that, it becomes harder to manage, and people get lost in the noise, so you need to be able to communicate effectively what are we going towards. And it also simplifies your integration scenarios as well. But I have a list view here versus a report of accounts under target. And again, we were back to a 5% target growth rate. And in that list view, I get only the accounts that I need to care about. So when we talk about actionable information, I may manage 50 accounts, but if I'm Brad Kowalski here, there's 2 of them here that I care about, and you can constrain this to just my accounts. It don't have to be everybody's. I just wanted to have a good sampling here. But once again, in that list view, leveraging that data, I know exactly what my gap to make goal is. I know what my percentage of growth, and in this case, we're trying to make 5%, so you can see where we stand in that, and then a couple other pieces of information. Finally, I want to wrap that up with one other key report. White space. So for those of you that may not be familiar with white space is the cross-sell, upsell opportunity. It's what I'm not selling that I should be selling within my account or my customer base. So I'm showing in the context of a particular customer. This is a direct customer, for instance. So in this case, when I sell them a generator, I would expect to be selling them a service contract and or an install. And we see that we're not doing this. So we're leveraging Salesforce's asset capabilities along with the integration to drive something like unique products that they've bought or not bought in the last 12 months, so that I know where my opportunity to get a larger share of wallet is. One thing I do want to point out about this, many of our customers have thousands of SKUs and products. This is not just a product level. Again, driving that integration. I can integrate out of my ERP with my product family, product category in here. So now I'm looking at a product family level, and this enhances my onboarding as well for new sales reps. They can come in, they know exactly where their opportunities are. They know exactly the things they're measuring across that top line there. It increases efficiency, lowers onboarding time, and increases overall focus and actionable information. So once again, white space, driving against those objectives, all these things working together off your ERP data to effectively drive things that are actionable, cut noise out of the system, and increase your overall efficiency of your sales team as you work towards your objectives. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over here. We wanted to save some time for some questions this afternoon, so I'm going to turn that back over. Linda, do we have any questions?
Thank you, James. We do have a few questions. And feel free to continue sending in your questions to the questions panel, and we'll get to as many as we can. We have some great questions from our audience. You may also send your questions to the email noted on the last slide for questions. There's an email address for you. Okay, so the first question we have from Kevin is, what other types of data do you commonly see integrated?
So that's a great question. And we commonly see, obviously we talked about sales order data, product and pricing data. So if you have a quoting scenario, and we see this commonly with when leveraging with Salesforce's CPQ product, driving the price book configurations out of the ERP, because that's where that's being set. You may have a back office pricing team that sets those. Maybe it's once a year, once a quarter, once a month, driving that in. Additionally, invoicing information. So if your customer service team is in your Salesforce instance, which I would hope it is to guide that 360-degree view, if you will, but invoicing information so that when a customer comes in, that information is available. They don't have to swivel chair, go over to this other screen. Also allows, if you have a sales rep going into the field to meet with the customer, that information would be available on their Salesforce mobile app as well.
Great, thank you. Another question we have from Nicole. What kind of data yields the biggest ROI when integrated with Salesforce?
So again, I think we touched on it today. I think the biggest ROI is the ones that are around the sales growth targets. And it is a loaded question because you have different ways to classify ROI, both from a marketing sense and a sales sense. So the key things that I look for that you should recognize are what are going to drive towards my top three top level sales goals. So if it's overall revenue, sometimes it's margin based, but then also not to overlook the marketing side of it, the segmentation piece. A key example I commonly see is when a customer hits a certain threshold, they now become a different class of customer, if you will, internally. They cross the threshold into a strategic account. And several things happen at that point. You may want to drop them into a marketing campaign or a journey, if you will, if you're using one of the marketing automation products. But you also need to start internally a sales rep assignment, because sometimes the smaller accounts are just round robin served by a group of people. But once you get to a certain size, you get a dedicated sales rep. So those things kind of work together. Those are the things that drive the most ROI I see, because they're connected to your, at an executive level, all the way down to your sales objectives and your overall growth objectives.
That's great information, James. Thank you. And we'll take one more question from Matt. What data do you suggest we integrate to support marketing?
So touching on that, things that you're going to drive your marketing campaigns off of segmentation, whether it's industry, sometimes that is in your ERP, but again, back to revenue levels, buying patterns. Do they buy monthly? You can very simply, through the integration and some of the automation in Salesforce, generate quality segmentation around that's actionable. And then driving off the behavior. We didn't touch on this a little bit earlier, but if I have a customer that buys monthly and they go more than 31 days without an order, something should happen. So whether a task gets assigned to sales rep, or we drop them into a drip campaign in Pardot that's working through a personalized engagement for them around that, because it's not just about new business, it's also about retention. So those are the types of things that I see commonly from a marketing standpoint, driving your segmentation, making sure it's accurate and up to date, and catching the new information that's coming out of your ERP based off your sales. And it can be credit based. Sometimes someone's having issues with their credit with you, dropping in and helping that system and automating, like I said, scalability around that is something that drives a lot of ROI from a marketing standpoint.
Great, thank you. That looks like all the time we have for today. The audience will receive a follow-up email within 48 hours with a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of Victoriam Solutions and our presenter, James Rogers, thank you and have a great day.